Welcome back to American Psychotherapy, the YouTube channel where I probably just talk to myself more than anything else. But for me, it's helpful to go for a ride and just give voice to some of my thoughts. To just vent and say shit out loud in the woods, by a pond, rolling down a dusty road. It doesn't matter. It might be of interest to somebody someday, probably not, but maybe. Anyway, if you've clicked in to today's ride, I'm glad to have you along. In this ride, I'm going to part the curtain a bit and give you a peek into my early life. So let's mount up and roll out. All right, we're rolling again. Thank you for coming along. And it will come as no surprise to you who have been on these rides with me before to learn that my opinion is America has already seen its zenith. Her best days, in my mind, are now behind her. And I understand there are many folks who would desperately dispute that fact, but I think those folks just haven't sat down to think through the irreversible impact of what we the people have done to hunt down Lady Liberty like she was a witch, because we got duped into thinking that's what she was. And we the people, frankly, knew better. Today's ride takes me back in time to sunny days long gone by, to the immigrants whose lives crossed paths with mine as a child and as a younger man. The fastest way I can explain my roots might be to suggest that you watch the opening scene to the animated film Megamind. Anyone who has seen it recalls how two superheroes arrived on planet Earth in different escape pods from a distant, rapidly imploding galaxy. The escape pod of Will Ferrell's character is Megamind, and his pod hits hard into a dank inner city setting, and it bounces over a prison wall where he is raised by the inmates of the Metro City prison, I think is what they called it. By contrast, stark contrast, the escape pod of Brad Pitt's character, Metro Man, touches down in an affluent neighborhood and rolls into a stately, magnificently furnished home, coming to rest under a Christmas tree, where two loving parents welcome his arrival. Well, for me, my arrival to Earth was much like Metro Man's. I landed out west in white Christian Central USA. I was the youngest, 6 years behind the youngest of my 4 siblings. We had a beautiful house on 5 acres, a long circle driveway with a huge lawn, so big somebody had to be hired to mow it and keep the grounds. It was a lawn you can be sure would never have seen a sign supporting a never elected to anything loudmouth crook in his quest for the highest office in the land. And you can be goddamn sure that lawn would have never seen a sign supporting that same asshole 4 years after he refused to accept the results of a free and fair election he lost. But that said, when I was 5 or 6, I became acquainted with the man my folks hired to tend the grounds. He was tall, compared to me anyway, had a deep voice, but a gentle voice. He wore a straw hat and drove an old truck with all kinds of stuff strapped to it. Trash cans, gas cans, rakes, shovels, hoses, hand tools, and lots of spare tires. The tires on his old truck were always bald. I don't ever recall being introduced to Mr. Parrish. In fact, I don't ever remember anybody else being nearby when I was with him. Mr. Parrish was a familiar face around our house. He was a trusted guy, and it was okay for me to be alone with him anytime he was working at our home. I'd run refills of lemonade out to him. I'd fetch a funnel from off his truck when he fueled his mower. He had countless friendly conversations with me, typical of any conversation that could be had with a 5 or 6 year old boy. His hair and skin were different from anybody else's I'd ever seen. He wasn't an immigrant, but looking back now, my guess is that at some point his family tree included immigration to America of the involuntary variety. Since those days of long ago, I had a hand in raising 6 kids of my own. And I know 5 and 6 year old kids are prone to say the damnedest things at the damnedest times. They're recording devices. That's what they are. They are human recording devices who can open their mouths and replay anything they ever heard. I'm happy to tell you, though, that in those early years of my life, I never overheard anything in my home that anyone ever told me not to repeat in front of Mr. Parrish. But if I had been raised in the era of MAGA and Fox News as a 5 or 6 year old kid, I could have recorded and replayed to Mr. Parrish plenty. I could have told Mr. Parrish what I heard at a friend's house on Fox News. How a cop with his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes did nothing wrong. I could have told Mr. Parrish what I heard on the TV, that Black Lives Matter folks are just a bunch of looters and thieves and murderers. If any such conversation had ever been overheard when I was 5 or 6 under these imagined circumstances, if any member of my family overheard my childlike attempt to tell Mr. Parrish what I saw and heard, do you know what would have happened? My mom, my dad, or any one of my siblings, all teenagers, who overheard that exchange would have immediately engaged with that moment. They would have immediately inserted themselves into that conversation with 3 objectives. First, to assure our family friend, Mr. Parrish, that what my 5 or 6 year old mind encountered and parroted to him was not indicative of our family's position on what happened to Mr. Floyd, and not representative of our family's view of any unrest associated with his death. The second thing that they would have done, I believe, is to have had a teaching moment with me right in front of Mr. Parrish to condemn the parroted assertions that came out of a 5 or 6 year old's mouth. And lastly, I think any member of my family who intervened in this would have expressed some measure of sensitivity to Mr. Parrish in connection with the publicly reported nationwide racial unrest. That's what I believe in my bones. That's who my folks were. And that's the family they raised and who helped raise me. As an adolescent, we had an immigrant cleaning lady who helped my mom maintain our large home. She came from a family of immigrant farmers. Whether or not Kimmy was a documented immigrant was never a subject of discussion because it simply didn't matter. Illegal or not, Kimmy was trusted around our home. Kimmy was respected around our home. My mom always was interested in, concerned with, and protective of Kimmy. If armed, badgeless, masked agents had ever descended in our driveway to detain her, to intimidate her, to torment her, to interrogate her, to zip tie her, to stuff her into an unmarked car and drive her away, my mom would have clung to Kimmy and not let go until her grip was torn away. My mom would have screamed with tear-filled defiance and inconsolable dread at such a scene. Not only because Kimmy was an employee and a friend, because legal or illegal, Kimmy was a human being. And this is America. My dad would have returned home and raised holy hell to help Kimmy, and to rage in response to the treatment of my mom. He would have awakened the dead in every hall of power he could possibly access. And he would not have stopped. He would not have suffered apathy from his elected representatives as an acceptable response, because this is America. When I was in high school, one of my sisters was in graduate school, dating an immigrant student from South Korea, who eventually became a physician and now practices medicine in the United States. If ICE thugs had accosted this immigrant student leaving Thanksgiving dinner in our home to revoke his visa for demonstrating on a university campus, to take him into custody, to haul him away without a warrant, without a hearing, to be detained indefinitely at some undisclosed location, both of my parents would have simultaneously lost their shit. This would have been a relentless demand on their part for due process on his behalf. Not because he was acquainted with us or valued at our table, but because he was a human being. And this is America. These are not the only immigrants who broke bread around a table with my family. My parents would have never once stood idly or silently by if any one of these guests in our home had been so treated, by simple virtue of the fact that they were all human beings, and this is America. My mom and dad would have done everything humanly possible to stand up for any of these people. My mom, who constantly placed herself at risk by picking up homeless folks to give them a lift, would absolutely have taken to the streets in protest rather than surrender to our government's brutality toward any other human being. I could also tell you what my folks would think of a U.S. president who has looted America to the tune of billions, who has abused his power, corrupted every agency, destroyed every trade relationship and every alliance, threatened and bullied every friend and neighbor America ever had. But I don't need to. There is no world wherein my folks would have ever brought themselves to peacefully abide and accept, let alone support, what is now unfolding every day on the streets of America. I guess it's up to you to reflect on your own life experience, on what you observed and what you were taught. I'm sure life experiences vary in vast measure, but by and large, we the people know better than to have closed our eyes and turned away from all of this. We were taught better. We were raised better. If Americans are to salvage any lingering virtues of what our nation once was, we the people need to first acknowledge our own catastrophic derailment from the historically moral and constitutional tracks that carried us, that carried our country, and carried human civilization so very far. I guess that's all I got to say. Thanks for coming along and listening to me rant out loud again. If you got anything out of this, please pass this right along to somebody else and start up a conversation of your own. And I hope you'll join me on my next American Psychotherapy ride too, so that I can tell you what's on my mind then. Thanks again.